For all the participants, please send me your first and also the second speaker name via private chat box. Thank you. For ini lagi ngapain and also nyam, please send me your first and also second speaker name to via private chat box. Thank you. Hello guys, I would like to remind you that the debate will be start at on 1:20 p.m. So for the speakers that didn't send me the speaker names, please send it as soon as possible. I will wait. Thank you. Hello, for ini lagi ngapain? Please send me your first and also the second speaker name. Thank you. For OG, is it complete? OG, for ini lagi ngapain?
Komplit.
Bentar.
Yes.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Hello everyone. My POI preference will be interrupting via unmuting yourself. Oh, ya ampun.
Sorry, Miss, can you send me your first and also the second so I will know before we start our speech? Thank you.
Sorry guys, miscom.
Yes, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Open Grand Final of National EEC in Action, EIA 19-2020 debate competition. Now we have a debate between Ini Lagi Ngapain with the first speaker is Chantika and John, and the second speaker is Johnny as the opening government. And as the opening opposition, we have Ratu with the first speaker is Mulan Kwok and the second speaker is Maya Ahmad. And from the closing government, we have Binus A, with the first speaker is Felix, and the second speaker is Raihan. And from the closing opposition, we have Nyam, with the first speaker is Kindi, and the second speaker is Jessica. The adjudicator for today is Miss Jessica, Mr. Ahmad Kusai, Mr. Erwin, Mr. Nabil, Miss Melinda, Mr. Randi Rentanaka, and Ms. Yosi Febi. Then the motion for this debate is this House regret the rising trend of self-diagnosis of one's mental health issue. Before we start the debate, I would like to remind the debater to give your POI preference before the speech, and don't forget to on your camera when you start your speech. And for the POI preference, whether by your turn on your microphone or by the chat box. Thank you. Now let's start the debate. To To open the debate, I call the Prime Minister, Ms. Chantika. For Ms. Chantika, time is yours.
Hello, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, let me prepare. One moment. I'm going to start my speech. In 3, 2, 1. What we need to understand is mental illness is not just a mere frustration or a quick anger or just a quick mental breakdown. Mental illness is way more complex than that. For example, you have multiple personality disorder where you're disassociated with reality because you have other personality that waiting behind your brains, for example. Or you have clinical depression where it's already take a biological hijack towards the depression itself have a biological hijack where you have anxiety to the point that you hard to breathe, for example, or you constantly breathing and say random words in order as a reaction to that depression itself. And we think that the trend of self-diagnose are only going to undermine and underwent that particular influences and impacts that these people had. Particularly, the stance of opening governance is very clear. We're going to regret the rise of self-diagnose. We're only going to advocate for people that professionally diagnosed by psychiatrists, which we think that already accessible in the current status quo. We already have BPJS, NGO, and whatsoever, and more groups that provide assistance for free or even more cheaper price in order to have you diagnosed. We think that what we're going to advocate is that you should stop self-diagnose and go for medical assistance before you actually talk to people that you have certain mental illness associated with you. In my speech, I'm going to prove to you two things. Why first, it's going to underplay the significance of mental illness, and second, why the narrative would only focus on what's currently sensational in the media. Firstly, why we think that in the current status quo, everyone try to associate their their quick anger or their quick mental breakdown as clinical depression. We think that in the current status quo, there's a lot of talk and discussion about mental illness. There's a lot of portrayal in the status quo because movies now currently take mental illness as something trending. That's why we see film like Split or 50 Shades of Grey that portrays certain mental illness to that. We think that when people consume this kind of media, they also feel that later. They feel that they have certain connected on what portrayed by 2 hours of films or a few minutes of what you see in soap operas and dramas. We think that this kind of association you feel that are going to affect you somewhat. There will be some unconscious association games in your brain, right? If you feel that you're very frustrated as what the film portray, you're going to try to say that and label yourself that, hey, I had a clinical depression, for example. If you're overwhelmed and feel that sometimes I can be very happy and extroverted, and sometimes I can be very sad and want to stay in my room and become alone, you suddenly associate yourself with bipolars, because what you see in the end going to affect on how you internalize the values and try to associate yourself. Especially in the current status quo, there's a lot of surveys that try to match you whether this is a correct symptoms or not with the mental illness. But before that, of course, Ratu.
Okay, so I'm just confirming, are you aware that there are another counter in this, in the context that there are still stigma within the society of mental health issues?
Exactly, because of the stigma. We think that we have to be very careful on how we talk and associate ourselves with mental illness, right? Because for people who have stigmatized and they suddenly hear lots of people suddenly diagnose themselves with a certain mental illness, it's going to be to worsen our stance and worsen our position in advocating mental illness to begin with, which exactly my first point about underplaying the significant impacts of mental illness. Just what I explained earlier, we think that when more people, especially people that by got that and do not have this preconscious bias toward mental illness, they become more desensitized with the issue. For example, I have a friend like Gio, for example, where he claimed that he have clinical depression. However, his claim does not go with his behaviors and how he handles and cope with stress, for example. This means when other people claims that they have clinical depression, I have sense of distrust towards these individuals. I have sense that maybe this is another Gio waiting in the corner and fool me that they have a mental illness to justify their laziness, for example, or their moment of anger and cannot control their behaviors at a certain point. But why this desensitized is bad, right? Especially mental illness becomes so sensational currently in Twitter and social media and whatsoever. Because in the end, if these people only claiming without necessary proof that they are professionally diagnosed, these mental illness are going to be derogatory words in the end of the day. This is the same case with SJW, where you see social justice system that only not genuine and not further enough. They're going to be called out. Their issues and the values and the people that fight for it in social media are going to be called out exactly because they underplay the significance and do not properly educated or properly diagnosed of mental illness. But secondly, why this is the narrative will only focus of what's famous or sensational. We currently see, for example, movies like Split, where it portrays multiple personality disorder because this handsome man have other personalities exist living in his body. We think that when what's famous and what's most often see and sensational with this individual, before that, yes, Jessica.
So, if there is still stigma in society, why would people bandwagon the trend of having depression? Do they think that the stigma will harm them?
You have to understand, people who have stigma, usually boomer or older people that do not understand and do not have much information or watch this portrayal of an awareness of this part of mental illness. The one that self-diagnose, usually people like millennials or young people like us that have so much information or so much exposure to mental illness information that going to further hamper exactly because these bigoted people will not understand why suddenly my children claiming that they had certain mental illness or suddenly they feel very frustrated and tell their parents that they, have clinical depression. Of course, we're going to celebrate if they go to medical assistance instead of bragging that they have mental illness, because we think that the new norm that created in the current status quo, if you have mental illness, that you can relate with much people, but not necessarily because you really underwent what these people really feel, Madam and Mrs. Speaker, because we think that what they feel is not only they are being detached by the society, but they become socially dysfunction. For example, they cannot be productive because they held back by mental illness. And these people who can still function normally, for example, will not able to create or portray what's important about mental illness to begin with. Therefore, ini lagi ngapain opens the debate.
Okay, thank you. The Prime Minister spent time 7 minutes and 29 seconds. To respond to the case of the opening government, I call the leader of opposition, Ms. Mulan Kwok. Time is yours.
Check. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, all right. Arranging my paper and time. All right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We don't understand the harms that has been brought by the opening government, because if the harm that is brought by the opening government is about how the advocacy of the mental health advocates will be worsened, and then the social justice warrior and such will be considered as ingenuine, we think at the end of the day that's the exact reason why self-diagnosis will not be weaponized in our side of the house. So we believe that in our side of the house, what we are going to give in this debate are three things. Number one, we're going to prove to you why at the end of the day, mental health issue is still new and accommodated issues. And acknowledge issues. Therefore, we think that self-diagnosis is something that should be normalized. Two, we believe that this trend of self-diagnosis is the most strategic way in order to ask for help from professionals. And lastly, we're going to play in the worst case scenario of opening government about weaponizing mental health issue, why we believe that the worst case is still a bullet that we need to take. But before that, several issues that I need to address in the opening government. Number one, opening government plays in the context of bigoted society. They believe that bigoted society has a preconceived bias against the mental health. Exactly, ladies and gentlemen, when they have the preconceived bias, the one thing that OG forgets is that this preconceived bias is only believing that mental health issues are the issues that are very, very crucial, despite the fact that we have seen a lot of spectrums of mild mental issues, even moderate mental issues, or the extreme mental issues. We think the mild issues that are something that we need to take care upon will be neglected under their side of the house. Why? Because when certain people self-diagnose that, oh my God, I need a certain help, I might have depression, I might have anxiety and such, those bigoted society will reject the demand of these individuals to ask for help. Therefore, what is the harm? The harm is that the minor issues will be even more aggravated, and it is going to be too late if later on the minor mental health issues is aggravated in the future. So we think that self-diagnosis is still important. Secondly, they believe about issue of calling out, or the credentials are at stake. We think the issue of calling out, or the issue that the credentials are going to be harmed, is not exclusive under their side. Because under their side, when they reject the self-diagnosis of one individual, and we believe that mental health issues are something that is growing if we do not put a lot of preventive or preemptive measures that can only happen through the normalization of self-diagnosis of the people, what will happen is that the mental health issues are going to be outnumbering the case that is going to happen in the status quo. That's when the credentials of the mental health advocates will be questioned because of the flooding continuous number of mental health issues that are keep going on and on, simply because self-diagnosis are rejected. Lastly, relatability. We think that relatability is something that is important in our side. Why? Because through the self-diagnosis and such, through the norm, we're going to habituate people to have a certain empathy for the individuals having the mental health issues. How so? By maximizing the empathy in our side of the house, through the self-diagnosis, that's when we encourage people to finally put understanding, put a certain support, or put a certain comfort for these individuals. Now, coming to my issues, on number one, why do we think that mental health issues is a new accommodated or acknowledged issue, therefore self-diagnosis is valid? We think that experts are not up to date yet in this issue, because we accept the case coming from Chantik, which is how mental health issue is just trending in our status quo. Therefore, we think that experts are not even aware to the growing spectrum of the mental health issues, because it keeps growing and growing. For example, in the past, we only understand that mental health issues are limited to depression and anxiety. That's it. Right now, we have ADHD, we have narcissistic personality disorder, OCD, paranoid, personality disorders, or even the borderline one. We think that at that point, we realize that the growing spectrums requires a lot of participation of the people to finally identify whether or not they have this kind of mental health issues. Therefore, self-diagnosis is very crucial. Secondly, we think that this is a very personal matter to begin with. Later on, we think that we think that certain people are very uncomfortable to share their mental health issues to the strangers. We agree, we concede on the characteristic that right now people with mental health issues are secretive, they're afraid to be judged, they are very, very fragile. Therefore, self-diagnosis is the only thing that they can afford to ask for a certain help, because they don't want that when they relapse, for example, and a lot of people realize that these people are mentally ill. We realize that in our status quo, the sad fact is that instead of giving them the treatment, they get judgment, they get even shackled, ladies and gentlemen. That is something that we don't like. So therefore, we think that this is a new accommodative issues that should normalize the self-diagnosis. Secondly, we think that self-diagnosis is the strategic way to ask for certain help from the professionals. No, sir. We think that the disease are very lot right now, which is very a lot of disease are exclusified in our status quo. It is totally different with mental health. We're not talking about cancers that needs laboratory checks, that needs confirmation to a certain doctors. We're talking about a certain cause or symptoms of mental health issues that we believe that each individuals have the different triggers or different causes that is personalized because they're very influenced by the surroundings, and we realize that everyone has different life journey, different upbringing, and different conflicts and challenges. On that point, when we believe that right now a lot of people are having a very different personalized issue, so when there are certain personalized trigger and that leads to them having a self-diagnosis, we want that as a starting point for the treatment. No, sir. So we think in our side of the house, after this becomes a starting point to for the people to seek for help, we think that at the end of the day, it leads to a better recovery. How so? By empowering the this is going to be an empowering process in our side, because mental health issue shows that when they can self-diagnose, they can have a certain control over their own agency, over their own self, over their own identity. That's when the information, the treatment, and every single thing that they seek is something that is going to be done by themselves, and that is an empowering process to begin with. And that is crucial. Why? Because we habituate people to ask for help, which is something that is totally normalized in our status quo. Now to the worst case, why do we think that at the end of the day, in their side of the house, even if weaponizing mental health issue happens, we think that it's still okay, because your self-diagnosis still needs a certain confirmation from the mental health professionals, right? Once you have a certain cause or symptoms that are very different that I explained in my second contribution. But even if it's proven that the case of the mental health is that the self-diagnosis is not a mental health issue, it's okay. We realize the issue is very complex. It needs total understanding and total socialization by the professionals. Therefore, we think that in the long run, perceptions of people towards the mental health issues, which will be better in our side of the house. So we think that under their side of the house, we realize that a lot of people are still not acknowledging this issue. We're very welcoming the self-diagnosis in order to put a more understanding towards the mental health issues. Therefore, let's fight for a better treatment for mental health issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The Leader of Opposition spent time 7 minutes 25 seconds. To sum up and close the case of the opening government, I call the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Johnny. Time is yours. Yes, you are.
Okay, give me 5 seconds. I'm starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Chair and panel, I'm going to do 3 clarification before I'm going to my issues, and then all the rebuttals come towards opening opposition would be intertwined with this. First clarification, I think that opening opposition is pretty dismissive when we're talking about mental illness, right? First, they're trying to say that this is important so individuals can self-diagnose, but second, they also say that if you self-diagnose, at that point you can cure yourself as well by your circumstances. This is questionable. First clarification, when we're talking about mental condition, for example, depression, it is because of it is a scientific proven, right? For example, there's a chemical block within your brain. At that point, you cannot assess and you cannot relate or identifying what you're feeling at the moment. Or for example, when you have a split personality, it is something that happened with your nerve system as well. It's something that biological. Self-diagnosing, for example, if you do not have this depression or mental illness is not when you're having a bad day or feel tired and sad, and then you tell yourself that you have depression. I think this is 2 different things, and I think people need to understand this. But second, I think that what we need to talk about in this debate is the rising trend of narratives of people self-diagnosing. Why then, when every individual, that a lot of millennials will self-diagnose, this is bad. Chantik already explained to you, when you see your friends self-diagnosing and that it's not proven to be true, there's going to be distrust. But why this is important? Because under opposition side, a lot of people would have a distrust, and there's a communal disbelief that this narrative exists and that mental illness is something that is true. Thirdly, I think that Chia Kwok explained to you perfectly that there's a advocacy that have happened, but a lot of psychology or advocacy when we're talking about mental illness need number, and we're still very weak in the status quo. Why is bad? It is bad under opening opposition, even if this become a trend and everyone talk about it. Because even if everyone talk about it and this become a trend and something that everyone talk about, I think what they talk about is wrong as well, right? So people will have the different the wrong mindset, and not everyone will understand what will happen on our side. Even though we think that a lot of NGO, a lot of psychiatrists with very limited resources, we do a very slow progress when we're talking about advocacy. But at least what we're telling you is the truth, and not everyone is trying to deny this, because not everyone will distrust the people that diagnose like what Chantik tell you. So what happened under my speech, right? Number one, I will tell you why this is bad. Lastly, I think that Chia Kwok also trying to explain why is this there's an urgency and why there's a benefit when we regret the rising trend of self-diagnose. I'm going to divide this into two issues, right? One, why this is better for people who really have mental illness, for example. But second, why this is better in a general society, that it will create better policy within the movement itself. First of all, I think we need to talk about people that really have depression, right? One, people that have depression or need to be cared are people that have depression are mostly feel lonely, or they do not have anyone to talk to, that anyone cannot relate to her problem because she cannot identify what her feeling is, right? Even if opening opposition trying to explain, there's already a lot of alternative, for example, psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists to begin with. The moment that you go outside of the room of that psychiatrist, you need the support coming from your community. It can go to your friends or your family. Why this is bad under opening opposition? Because at that point, when you go to your friends will probably only say that lo dramatis aja, lo lebay, gila lo, gitu. I'm very sorry. Yeah, I'm very sorry. Second, this is why this is why the point that opening opposition trying to explain that you need empathy to help people will not eventually be achieved under opening opposition as well. Second, I think that when it goes to your friends and family that want to give you your support, a lot of people cannot relate to this and tell that you are dramatic. Why under our side this is better for the people that really have mental illness, right? We say that right now in the current status quo, when a lot of people are self-diagnosing, there's a rising trend in Twitter of the opposition, the opposite of the advocacy, by saying that lu lebay or you just an SJW, like what Chantik tell you. This is bad for people that really have, after this, people that really have depression, for example, because number one, they would not want to come up because they would because the moment that they're trying to speak, a lot of people will probably say, oh, you're just self-diagnosing yourself, that they will not try to find a support because they're scared. But second, if they have a very severe mental condition, for example, like Chia definition by saying that these people are very secretive and they do not want to show up, for example, this will give a double pressure towards them, that they also have depression, but they're also being pressured by society by saying that, you know, you just being dramatic. This will give them a double burden of thinking, for example. I think this is bad for people that have mental depression that also need care, right? But before the POI.
Yeah, sir. Normalizing the self-diagnosis will create a trend, will create a norm that once there is a self-diagnosis, we're going to create a norm in which we direct the people towards a professional help. Under your world, the lullaby narrative will still stick because they believe that this self-diagnosis is invalid.
Listen, if, for example, you have a depression and you just aware of that, sometimes you talk to your friend first, right? Rather than you langsung go to psychiatrist. What will your friend say? It's, ini probably it's just a trend and it's just a self-diagnosing. Maybe you sleep on it, compared to go to the psychiatrist. It will not happen under the opposition side, right? But second, I feel like when it goes to policy and what happened within the movement, when we're talking about this movement, we need to create a lot of discussion. But why this is important? Because even if the discussion happened by the psychiatrist, they will spend most time by trying to clarify that you should not self-diagnosing, compared to spending more time and resources talking about catatonic, for example, or bipolar or schizophrenic, like what opening opposition would like to achieve under their side, right? So if opening opposition explain that we have limited resources, they will spend more time by clarifying that self-diagnosis is bad compared to telling that schizophrenic is real to begin with. Lastly, let's talk about the boomer, like what Chantik told you. Chantik tell that a lot of boomers do not want to engage to the discussion because they feel like a lot of millennials is the me generation that always want to prioritize themselves and being fire, right? This is important because at that point, a lot of the discussion that happened in the parliament, for example, a lot of people there are boomers will only say that this is just a trend because they just watch 50 Shades of Grey or they just watch Split. Because at that point, they will also give the narrative that this will also, this discussion will erase within 2 months, for example, or 3 months. So we don't really need to talk about that. I think this is important because as a movement, you would like to create a policy, for example, creating better healthcare system for mental illnesses that have never been something that is important under the parliament. It's something that we can cater under the opening document. Thank you. I'm very sorry for my words, right? Yeah, I'm very sorry.